here in the US, certainly in other areas to varying degrees, but in the US, it's really big. We like hard truths and we want absolute everything. It needs to be universally true, or my brain doesn't like it and wants to discard it. Or I have this like negative, this visceral like aversion to the idea. Nuance? No, that's for weirdos. And this may have started in grade school for a lot of us. Because people, when they hear science, they think, oh, that's a subject in school with a bunch of facts that I learned. Mm-hmm. Right? They're confusing the process of science with the convenient results that get boiled down into like nifty little paragraphs and like a glossary at the end of the chapter if we're talking grade school. Like these little terms. And they think, ooh, that's knowledge, this crystallized thing, like the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. You know, that meme, right? That refuses to die. So we have that kind of stuff going on, right? And you know, when you're faced with the reality, which is, well, all that came from somewhere, all of those neat, nifty little wrapped up in a bow factoids that make you feel all cozy and like, ooh, I can drop this at a party and impress somebody. We like to collect knowledge. It's like collecting certifications or feathers in the cap or merit badges, not to criticize those things, because I do a little bit of that myself. I think people have an idea that science is this crystallized knowledge you accumulate. And so then when they see the uncertainty that is where it really lives, they can't reconcile that with what they were taught or conditioned to expect for so many years.
Welcome to Influence to Death, your guide for navigating the wild world of wellness influencing.
Hi, and welcome to Influence to Death. My name is Victoria LaFont.
I'm Hannah Wright, and today we have a surprise and special guest on the podcast.
Yeah, welcome, Geoff. This is Geoff Futch, soon to be Dr. Geoff Futch. We have all fingers and toes crossed, although I don't think you're going to need that. And so today, Geoff is here to talk about, I'm just calling it research reliability, basically our ability to rely on the information that we read in scientific research. It's one of the, I'd say, like touchstones of this podcast. It's not the only source of information that we rely on when we cover a topic, but you hear us a lot saying like, oh, we read this in a research paper. We'll put that research paper in the show notes, which I have to say I've been a little faulty lately. I haven't been citing all of our sources in the show notes, but if people want the papers that we're reading specifically, please contact us. But the other day on Facebook, the memories section popped up and I just happened to see this post. I think it's been like 4 or 5 years ago. I posted something about science and Geoff replied. I'm just going to read your reply to get started. And then Geoff, I want you to introduce yourself. The reply was so... It's like how I imagine you, Geoff, when like I think about you, just like balanced and intentional. And so Geoff wrote, I do think that the stereotype of the nefarious scientists who have been bought by some shady company and only care about profits has been fed by too many bad TV movies and dramas written by people with little originality and even less experience in actual research. The overwhelming majority of researchers, whether they do work that happens to be sponsored by a private interest or not, are very ethical and altruistically motivated. It isn't as though industry thugs go down to the lab and stand there watching over the researchers' shoulders to intimidate them into producing a desired result. Biases absolutely creep in, no doubt, but they're almost always in the form of honest human failings that even the smartest and noblest of us can fall prey to, not some conspiratorial machinations. How do you pronounce that? Machinations?
Machinations.
Okay.
At least also, where I come from.
You might know the word, Geoff, of where you constantly mispronounce words because you don't say them, you just read them. I've been trying to remember that word for a long time.
It actually escapes me too. See,
okay, perfect.
We all have our limits.
That's surely. Not some conspiratorial machinations bent on deceiving the public. What is far more often the culprit in widespread misinformation is the capitalistic drive by private interests and clickbait-driven news to twist things so that research is made either more beneficial for a certain party or more buzzworthy to generate controversy and resulting traffic. That isn't the fault of the researchers. That is the fault of a greedy and unscrupulous society that is also scientifically ignorant. So that's what...
Yep.
That in years of working with you inspired us to ask you on. So Geoff, do you want to kind of give us a little bit of your background and we'll just keep discussing.
Yeah. See where it goes, right? Well, first off, I was checking myself in the camera to see how much I was blushing there from the that introduction. I don't know that I deserve the praise I get, but I'll try to lean into it a little bit.
Who doesn't love having their Facebook responses read on a podcast?
And I'm sitting here thinking, like, good Lord. Well, I mean, there's some things that I've said that would have been worse choices.
Old, right?
Something like that. It was a few years back.
And kind of in the heat of the COVID pandemic also. So.
Oh, yeah. So, and that's actually an important thing that we can circle back to is the context in which some of these things are made or said or whatnot. But foist, actually, it also occurs to me that machinations or machinations, I've heard it pronounced both ways by very educated people. So that's just one of those language is fluid things. Let people come on and troll me later. That's totally fine. Okay. I'll try to be more brief than that comment you read. Hi, everybody. I'm Geoff. I currently work in the field of exercise physiology most directly. I started off college in physics and then went into political science for a while, which makes me really pedantic with how I write. And then ended up in exercise science kinesiology and did my undergrad in that, my master's in that. I'm now on a second run of a PhD in the exercise science world. A few years into that, so I'm looking at advancing to doctoral candidacy, doing research on chronic kidney disease. But I've had this kind of weird circuitous path through a number of different academic areas that kind of at least tangentially run into exercise science. One of them, a heavy one being, is actually the only reason I'm on this podcast, being the realm of nutrition, because for several years I've worked at an institution where I've encountered our two hosts here. And I was initially brought in for sports nutrition, but then I also had involvement in some other courses as well. One of which we can maybe circle back to is nutritional epidemiology and clinical research, where some subjects that might come up today have been touched on. So there's a lot more I could say, but I think some of that will maybe just kind of come out in the conversation. And I don't want to take the reins for too long there.
You have a pretty strong, I mean, I know you're comparing yourself to like the strongest, but you have a strong grasp of statistics and statistical interpretation. And on a personal note, it's interesting that university that you're at now, your advisor just happened to be my husband's advisor when he was getting his degree. I think his degree is in exercise physiology. I can never.
That would be where it would be. But yeah, it's been the exercise physiology program for years.
Yeah, it's like his most beloved professor. So there's just like some interesting ins and outs. We had no idea. I mean, this was it was just all coincidental. But yeah, there's just like some sweetness there. And also, I mean, I'll say personally, I've worked with you as a student, and then I've worked with you as a coworker, and I've seen you as a teacher, and you're a good teacher. You're a solid teacher. So you're a good person to have come on to speak to a general population of people who are like, hey, like the whole goal of this podcast is just to explore different topics and kind of come out with like what is versus what is said to be or what is marketed. And so this is a kind of a meta episode to be like, what we see in the research, can it be trusted? There's a lot still of questioning that comes up in that. I would say in the world of functional health, holistic health, and we can discuss some of the reasons why.
Sure,
but great. That was part of your response, to that Facebook post was addressing that.
Yeah. Well, there's, you know me well enough to know that I also have an opinion on so many things, or even if it's not like a deeply held emotional opinion on a thing, it's a stance based on, well, I've made a lot of observations on this, so I'm gonna spit something out. Admittedly, especially if it's something like a Facebook thread, it'll often feel like I'm pulling a pin on a grenade, chucking it into a room, and then ducking out. Usually it's coming from a good place of trying to introduce some ideas,
And so, Geoff, in your background, you have actually worked in labs, like you've been a bench researcher. Is that right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Depending on how you want to define bench research, because at the extreme end of it, and this could be a whole episode in itself probably, but at one extreme end, you have people who are like running assays all day and, aliquoting stuff with a pipette and, running gels and, like whether it's a PCR or something like that. And apologies to anybody in the audience who doesn't know what I'm talking about. The point is,
Hannah and I are just smiling and nodding.
Right. Mm-hmm. The cool things where you see somebody in a lab coat leaning over a bench, handling like, science liquid, whatever. Yeah. It's like, 15% better science if it's a multicolored vial thing. But like, you have people who do that, and that's like hardcore bench science. I have trained in some of that. And then you have people like, my program, for example, is an applied science thing where, yes, I'm in a lab, might have somebody on a treadmill, or might be doing some muscle scans. Like I'm doing ultrasound measurements on people and what's called NIRS, near infrared spectroscopy measures on people to look at oxygenation within tissues.
Cool.
So like, yes, I'm putting hands on people and I'm doing things in the lab that, the direct data collection that's responsible or that's required for us to eventually have something to write about. So in that sense, yeah, because there are levels to these things. There's kind of a spectrum to how close you are to the data points themselves that are being collected. And in that sense, yes, I've done a decent amount of time.
So Hannah, do you have a place that you'd like to start, or do you want me to start throwing out?
Start throwing out stuff. I mean, I'm really into this conversation. I'm excited to learn. I mean, it's something that I think about a lot because especially now it's getting like worse with just social media and influencers. I mean, that's the whole point of this podcast, but it's just, I'm always so interested in understanding the psychology of why people view science the way they do, why like they're so susceptible to falling into these traps of what influencers are telling them, or misinformation, or just kind of like seeking out confirmation bias, and why it's so hard for us as humans. Like what is it with our brains that puts us down that path? But that's just my personal interest. So if we touch on that kind of stuff, great. If not, so Victoria, you go for it.
I'm with Hannah though too, and it's interesting. I think that I think about the success and popularity of this podcast. Not that our goal is to be influencers or have some like sway over people.
Because that would be really ironic, and I would love it. I would live for that.
I mean, I will say that we have a goal of having enough paid subscribers that we can do this for most of our income. That's a huge goal that we have, but I think that could be cool, we're right? We're pretty transparent with that. But I think that Hannah and I, and probably you too, Geoff, we're more interested in these meta questions versus the direct questions of like, should I just eat carnivore or not? Would you all please just tell me? Or like, should I go keto? Or should I drink my pee? I mean, there's like some crazy shit on the internet now, But like to us, the more
it used to just be Bear Grylls, and now you have health influencers doing it. It was fine when it was just a meme. Sorry.
It is.
I had a moment there.
It's actually like I've seen like memes about like fermented pee. So we're like, we're getting into like some preparation. But yeah, I think we're more interested in like why people interact with information the way that they do, and why they trust the sources that they happen to trust. So we're going to try to keep it like pretty bulleted, but I can totally see this conversation like get into some squirrely places.
There are rails, but then there are the trails off the rails. Right?
There's like those bumper plates that you put in the kids' bowling lanes. It's soft. The rails are soft.
I'm careening right over that.
So kind of the first bullet that I'll bring up, Geoff, is that good science is almost impossible to come across. That's kind of the like overarching idea, that it's manipulated for profit, or there's like some sponsor or financial tie for benefit that, let's say, like a private entity would have to a certain outcome. So I think that's like one of the biggest objections that I hear about, let's say, looking at a research paper and then applying the results to real life. So go.
Wind me up. Bing! Hit the button. So, okay. First off, I want to address something. When you say good science, there are so many different kind of offshoots of that. I know we don't have time to get into them all, but there's like technically executed well. There's that piece to it. And then there's what you're really focusing on right now, which is more the ethical honesty kind of part of it, I guess, or whether a bias that's influenced by things like a funding source could, like, is that going to affect what comes out? Right. So I'll stay on that for now, if you want. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So first off, the quotation that you read earlier kind of touched on this. Bias is a thing. It's absolutely a thing. We all have to be aware of it. Anybody who takes research training gets taught about it, or at least they should. Anybody who has a mentor in the lab who's halfway worth anything will have been taught and trained about these things. But what I will say is, and having also written grant proposals, okay, you seek funding, but the funding sources in many cases, particularly at least like in my case, I was writing NIH grant proposals. So, a government entity, they are not interested in the result. You get the funding before you carry out the research. That's normally how it is done. Now, it might be dispersed in installments if it's a really, really large research project that's renewed, say, year on year. And like I've seen 5-year research projects or contracts and things like that. But it's important, one thing, for people to know that in many of these cases, the funding, it's not after the fact. It's not like, we will give you money if you produce this result. It's, if you create a proposal that is compelling and seems like it has value or whatever, it fits with, depending on the funding source, every funding source does have an agenda. It's not a dirty word. But if it fits the agenda of the funding source, then they will decide that it's worthy of, dispersing some dollars for that. Now, somebody who hears this is going to say, yeah, but, and the yeah, but attached to that is that, well, yeah, it's true that they disperse the money up front, but to keep repeatedly producing stuff that you can then build on to produce the next proposal, you might have to have certain kinds of results. And yes, that's kind of true in the sense that you're going to have these cases of, it's a related but somewhat separate subject of positive publication bias in research, where if you don't produce, very clear effects, lots of times things get kind of just filed away, never talked about. They're not seen as interesting. They may not even get published. And so it makes it harder to have as compelling of a grant proposal. If you say, well, we did these 15 studies before and, 12 out of the 15 produced null results. It doesn't seem very sexy, right?
Yeah.
And it's true. And it's unfortunate because if you do really good research and it happens to produce a null result, if everything else up front was sketched out well, it was well designed, and it was well executed, then you should treat those results as good information either way. You shouldn't be saying it's only good information if it produces this result versus that. Because if that's what you're going into it with, then you are ahead of time biasing yourself towards a certain result, and that's an intellectually dishonest way to proceed. But let me backtrack, because we were talking about funding, right?
Yeah, but this is good. Like these little...
They're related. They kind of have to be... Yeah, they have to be brought in to give some context. I have never seen a situation in which pressure was put on researchers in the way that I think people view it when it comes to produce result X to get dollar amount Y. It's just not... I've never seen it work out that way. You will probably see something closer to that in industry, in the sense that there is a tighter agenda with any kind of a private funding source. If they have their own in-house researchers and whatnot, there are certainly going to be cases where, well, you're producing this research and we have our internal white papers. They are not published for the public to see. They're just kept internal. I know of cases where even government entities have sometimes done that. Like NASA has done stuff where they have their own internal research that may or may not ever see the light of day. That's not to say that they're shady. It's its own separate conversation. And I have friends who probably know more about that than I ever will. So they would be better to talk to about it. But the point is, the armed thug, with a crowbar just standing there, looming over a researcher, or, threatening to make a late night house call if they don't, publish something. No, that's not a thing. It's never been a thing, at least in the developed world, as far as I'm aware. I'm not saying it never happens, but I'm saying I've never seen it happen, and nobody I know who's a fellow researcher or academic, as far as I'm aware, has ever seen it happen. So it's at least rare enough that I'm a couple degrees removed from a single incidence of this. And so that's just to put it kind of in perspective, kind of keep things in scale.
Do you feel like, I know the exact research that people are referring to during the pandemic, where it's okay, we see the efficacy studies of the vaccine come out, and then you do look at the funding source, it's all of the researchers are employed by Pfizer. There's this huge tie. And so I think, that situation, there's a lot of context and fear and unknown around that. But in my own self, I was like, this doesn't feel good to me.
And that is valid, right? At risk of being all feelings are valid. People will pick on that notion sometimes. I do voices, by the way. This is me. If you haven't picked up on it, I know I'm real subtle with it, Hannah, but you'll catch up eventually. There's you said something, Victoria, that actually was kind of interesting, and it relates to something that we said during the break when we were chatting. Granted, different context, but something about just being afraid. And so when you're looking at results of something, or you're looking at funding sources, there is that valid feeling of, okay, I can't say that's unethical, or I can't say it's wrong, but something doesn't feel right about it. And I wish we as a group, as a society, what have you, could take a little time to slow down and unpack that, because I think there's a lot of good reasoning behind it. We have had like just enough examples of unethical practice, or maybe not intentionally unethical stuff, but stuff that was just sloppily handled, that it probably has engendered a lot of distrust, a lot of, I don't want to say skepticism. I have I'm very specific about how I use that word. It's kind of like significant, right?
Which, let me just say, there is like a tendency toward being pedantic that I think the world of exercise science attracts. Like, I call my husband the pedantic prince. It's I can't say shit. It's like, it has to be exactly right. And there's something.
Do not call it lactic acid. It's lactate, and I will come at you with a bat if I...
Yeah, there's like a thing.
My first ex-phys professor was
also
rough on
a
that.
really important skill when you're talking about these complex topics, because you have to have some precision.
Yes.
Yeah,
sure.
Thanks for that.
Yeah.
Be as pedantic as you'd like.
It's good. I will. God, that you need me on for a whole separate episode to talk about exercise science specifically, because I can.
Yes, totally.
Exercise science influencers. Oh, I got material.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
I have years of accumulated trauma and anger relating to that field. But yeah. So.
I mean, Geoff, unpack it a little bit. I think that if you can, however far you can get in, 5 to 10 minutes, it's like, that's a really important topic for a lot of people.
Okay. Well, what I'll say is this, just some quick points about it. Being pedantic. Why does it attract people like that? I think a lot of fields do to some extent, and just we happen to be adjacent to that field, so we see a lot of it. However, there's a selection bias right there. However, what I have seen in terms of the influencer space is people want to appear, air quote time, evidence-based. And the phrase evidence-based, as I've been saying for years, it makes me sound like an influencer trying to be all self-important. As I've said for years.
You're gonna run into it.
I try to be self-aware at least.
But I meant unpack like the fear around the research and the funding.
Okay, yes.
Yeah, like that like portion of our conversation where it's like,
let's do that.
Like,
first.
we've had just enough examples, like you said, of unscrupulous practices, or like you said, muddled science.
Yeah. So, to stay on that point, pivot my brain. There's like, in the context of things like which direction do I want to go with this?
Kind of the example that somebody actually posted a little like market research question on Facebook where I asked, like, this was my exact question: what are some reasons why you don't trust science?
I saw that post. Right.
Yeah. And so somebody else, I saw you kind of replied to some people. But my friend was like, tobacco paying for independent studies.
Right.
Okay. Yes.
Hey, cigarette smoke it's not actually harmful.
Yeah. So this gives me something to get purchase on and direct myself. So you have industry, and then you have like public sector government stuff, and then you have, some kind of gray areas as well. But let's try to keep it simple here. The tobacco industry is a phenomenal example of science misused. Now, it does not necessarily mean the scientists themselves were unethical. It very much depends on which study we're talking about. In many cases, you'll have scientists who produce the research, but then it's like out of their hands. And it's how are things publicized? What sees the light of day and what does not? And if you're a scientist who works for a certain company and you do anything that company doesn't like, then you get the axe and now you're on the street. And not that I'm saying a person should lie to preserve their jobs, but I think it's realistically, it's a thing that we have to face as a reality of life, that we will filter or bend our presentation or just stay a little quieter than we would like sometimes in the interest of self-preservation. And I wish that weren't the case. I think there's
Geoff,
a lot of that.
We have to do it in our marketing agency.
Yeah.
I mean, our mission is to promote only like really balanced evidence-based information, but there are definitely cruxes in our day where it's like, man, we have to pay rent.
So that's like, we should be able to say that openly. Like, this sucks. We don't like it. It's a reality. If we all at least keep it out in the open, air it out, and talk about it, then that will engender some more trust between everybody involved in the conversation, because at least like we're not hiding it, like, no, yes, this is a thing. Kind of like being very forthcoming about your funding sources. That's why we don't want to hide potential conflicts of interest. But to finish off the thing about the tobacco industry before pivoting, that's a great example of, okay, this entity had a very specific goal in mind. They had an agenda. And so they bent research or misrepresented research or, weighted research in a certain direction, et cetera, to convince the public of something. So this is where you had marketing, PR, and politician type people who were really doing a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of swaying public opinion.
Right.
And, against what the truth, quote unquote, might be.
Right. It's not like the scientists were back there in the lab, like, we're going to make it look this way.
Generally not. Yeah.
Generally not. It makes me think of when Dr. Mark Messina came on and we were talking about soy, and he was talking about, the myth, which he also elaborated that he doesn't like to use the term myth lightly, pedantics, but he talked about how the public perception that's been there for decades, that soy will make men feminine, will increase your estrogen, will cause you to grow boobs, like all these things.
Yeah.
It's not based on nothing. He traced it back to this article published in Men's Health magazine, which was talking about a case study, which was legit science, of one person who drank 12 cups of soy milk a day for years and did start to, it affected his hormones, and he had like outward effects of that. Sure. And so then they talked about that, and then it got into pop culture, and it was like, and it was really just sensationalized greatly for people's benefit, to capitalize on it. So
that's huge. Yeah. And so you're touching on a thing, I'm using a very technical term, that this phenomenon that's been in our life and in our culture, where there's that game of telephone. Something has a kernel of truth somewhere way, 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 way back. And if you can't grab onto those kernels and speak honestly about them, what you end up having happen is this constant pendulum swing back and forth. You get people in this camp saying, this is nonsense and doesn't exist. You get people at the other end say, it absolutely exists, and here's why. And it's like, well, the truth is somewhere. It doesn't mean it's right in the middle. Don't want to do the whole middle ground fallacy thing. But if you can't appreciate those details, it's like you'll never get to what the reality is, and you end up throwing the baby out with the bathwater or whatnot, right? So lots of things that I think the kind of pop science community have started labeling as pseudoscience in a very ham-fisted sort of way are based in some kernel of truth like that, where, people are coming at these ideas, they didn't fabricate them out of nowhere. They didn't just have a fever dream. I wandered off into the woods and a voice told me this thing, and I came back and,
Although I will say some trends that, I'm just thinking like there's a difference in my mind between saying like, hey, I have a little feeling of like, I'm questioning around Pfizer's sponsored vaccine studies versus I think I'm getting injected with a microchip that will then be activated by 5G and whatever.
I'm still waiting for mine to kick in.
I'm still actually, the other day
I'm not getting any reception.
Told Andrew, I was like, I think our time's almost up. Like all the people who took the vaccine were supposed to be dead in whatever 4 to 5 years. Like that's right now.
We're doing okay.
Come on, I got a schedule to keep. Let's go. Yeah.
But, it's like, so, there's levels, like there's degrees of how people put information out into the world or accept what they, think is true or false. But I think by and large, most people kind of in the silent majority, there's more of just like a, what is true, what is not, and it is based on a kernel of truth versus like a very like a fantastical interpretation of how they think reality is. And Geoff, we get to this point in every topic that we cover on this podcast where it's like, hang on a second, there is something here. It's just been like misrepresented or misunderstood. And so it's interesting that it's like, okay, well, that is actually happening at the core of where the information comes from. In the literature. Yeah.
And so do we want to focus on that for a bit?
Talk about that a little bit. I think that's really important.
I have thoughts. I'm not, an expert on the whys of this, but from what I've observed, there are a few things, and some of this is based on stuff I've read from people who've studied this academically as well. There are these kernels of truth, but why is there this constant pendulum swing, and there's all this doubt and this anger and this kind of like East Coast, West Coast. There's like a Bloods and Crips kind of thing going on in a lot of these different subject areas. And I think part of it comes from the fact that, at least here in the U.S., certainly in other areas to varying degrees, but in the U.S. it's really big. We like hard truths and we want absolute everything. It needs to be universally true, or my brain doesn't like it and wants to discard it.
Mm-hmm.
Or I have this like negative, this visceral like aversion to the idea. Nuance, no, that's for weirdos. And
Right.
so, and this may have started in grade school for a lot of us, because people, when they hear science, they think, oh, that's a subject in school with a bunch of facts that I learned.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
They are confusing the process of science with the convenient results that get boiled down into like nifty little paragraphs and like the glossary at the end of the chapter if we're talking grade school. Like these little terms, and they think, ooh, that's knowledge, this crystallized thing, like the mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell. You know, that meme, right? That refuses to die. So we have that kind of stuff going on, right? And you know, when you're faced with the reality, which is, well, all that came from somewhere, all of those neat, nifty little wrapped up in a bow factoids that make you feel all cozy and like, ooh, I can drop this at a party and impress somebody.
An A.
Yeah, I can get an A, or I can impress somebody.
Good.
Yeah, you know, it's like we get these little, you know, like these little dopamine hits, you know, of
you feel secure,
validation.
I know this is what it is,
yes,
and
it's like
it makes me feel safe.
Yes, it's this little absolute like discrete nugget of information or whatever, and I can put that in my collection of other little nuggets, and like, ooh, you bring people over your house, look at all my nuggets. That can be taken out of context. That's going to be a quote for later. But look at all of these things I've accumulated. We like to collect knowledge. It's like collecting certifications or feathers in the cap or merit badges, not to criticize those things, because I do a little bit of that myself. I think people have an idea that science is this crystallized knowledge you accumulate. And so then when they see the uncertainty that is where it really lives, they can't reconcile that with what they were taught or conditioned to expect for so many years. And, you know, and unfortunately, the sad irony is that the most intellectually honest people are the ones who are saying, well, it seems to be this, but we're not sure. We had this other, you know, we did this other experiment that didn't yield those results, so we're still kind of waiting. So they seem wishy-washy. They seem like they don't know what they're talking about. But then you get some influencer, right, who's all fire and brimstone, like shouting from the pulpit that, no, this is how it works, and I will show you the truth, and I will show you the way. You know, just follow me and sign up for my, you know, my email funnel, and you know, here a small paywall, and you can get into my inner circle or whatever. That doesn't sound culty at all, right? And so you have these people giving the illusion of certainty, and that is much sexier and much easier to sell than the reality of uncertainty. And when you're conditioned through your formative years not to deal with nuance, not to deal with uncertainty, not to face not knowing something and living in that uncomfortable space, by the time you reach adulthood, then you get in, and on top of that, maybe you have a family, you got a career, you got skin in the game. You hear these things that are kind of a threat to what you think the world is. It's kind of natural, I think, to expect a lot of people to push back against that. And I can look at most of my extended family. I'm not going to name names for anybody who sees or hears this podcast and gets mad. But there are a lot of people like I know and I'm close to who are great examples of this thing, and it's hard to break yourself with that. So I think that's a big piece.
Yeah. I mean, I think the fear around possible harm based on industry funding is likely the biggest objection to believing the outcomes of research. And I mean, I feel it. I have those same questions. I think the problem comes down to, and Geoff, you know, it'd be interesting to hear what you have to say about this. It's like there was a lot of empowerment that I got from studying with you, with Dr. Sharp, with these people who passed on to me tools to look at a research paper to be like there's some things that are very black and white, like, hey, the methodology is really sound, you know, the way that the study was designed and the way that it was carried out, or maybe it wasn't, there's some question here. But the fact that most people, you know, don't have that skill set is probably so it's like unnerving. It's like, other than being like a biostatistician or being, you know, an expert in a very particular field, like being like a vaccinologist, I don't even know what the word would be, or a virologist, you know, like somebody who like studies this full time. It's like, how do you know?
Right. You have the trust, and that's really scary to just put your trust in someone you don't know, you know, and
and the name escapes me right now, which is that there was an article that then prompted a whole book called The Death of Expertise that came out. And in fact, Victoria, I think we've talked about it before. Yeah, you can Google it real quick. But it speaks to this notion that over time we've turned into a society that does not, like, everybody has an opinion. Of course we all have opinions, but everybody feels like I have to question every expert all the time because everybody's potentially crooked, and and it's just taken to such an extreme that now there's no trust, like you're talking about. And it's, of course, you don't just take your brain out and hand it to somebody else and go, oh, right, make all my decisions for me. But it is important to know, like, when I go to get my car worked on, my mechanic has a lot more expertise in that than I do. So I better really have done my homework before I decide to question what they're going to do.
Right.
Yeah, it's just, if people are interested, it's The Death of Expertise by Tom Nichols.
Okay.
Why we distrust experts.
And you know what's wild to me is that it's so acceptable to distrust experts and scientists when, like you mentioned, Geoff, like the majority of scientists are in it because they care, they're passionate, they want to better humanity or whatever human condition. And it's not like they're in it for the money for the most part. Like, they really want to do better. Whereas in contrast, influencers, especially on Instagram and TikTok, people trust them and develop this weird parasocial like relationship with this person that they don't even know. And the marketing is so powerful that, you're taught that as like a nutrition influencer. Even if you're a professional, you're taught, well, you have to be relatable and you have to talk to your audience and you have to do all these things so they'll trust you and then they'll buy your product. And that's really at the foundation, is like, you want to funnel them to buy your product. And that's where all the work goes into, of being on the camera and being relatable. And, the bulk of your audience, they have no idea who you are. They're not going to meet you, but they trust you, even though you may not have any expertise, versus someone who's studied for 2 decades on a specific topic and they don't trust that person,
Yeah.
and they have no skin in the game. Like, they're not looking to profit off of you at all. There's no,
like, their job doesn't change, their income doesn't change, whether, you believe them or not.
The rub there, though, that, look, I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit because I have this part of me heavy that I've had to push against. It's like, I mean, Hannah, of course, I posted something one day that was like, it's so funny that people want to question, like the authorities that they question, but like, you don't want to question these other authority. It's like, you like to pick and choose which, which industry you see as negative. But I think it goes both ways. It's like, this is where I personally usually come back to. It's like, there are huge industries that affect our lives that aren't as blatantly apparent as, like AG1 greens and like we just did an episode, Geoff, about like this, we're really trying not to name names, but like this colostrum powder that's making, like, colostrum is wonderful, we've read so many effectual studies that are applicable to exercise science, but the claims are so outlandish. It's like, but then on the other side, it's like there are entities that are so big, we don't even really think about them anymore. And I think people will commonly point to like the pharmaceutical industry, or just like kind of the blind acceptance of like, this is the vaccine schedule. And it's like so contentious and controversial. It's like, to me, it's strange, again, to go back to, why would you question this one part of what influences your life day to day and not the other side? It's like, I guess one is more prevalent, right? Like the effective one could be more prevalent. And I'm just going to dovetail this into, I think, part of the reason why people have come to this point. And I will say it was part of what still to this day fuels my questions, is when you have a personal experience and you see like Hannah and I both have practiced clinically, you see something happen clinically and you're like, there's not an explanation for this. And it really seems like there is a connection here, but everybody out there is like, that's kooky. Don't think that way. I mean, biochemistry is not intuitive sometimes, which is hard, but it's like basically the demeaning of the observation that people have, I think, plays into this. It's like, okay, well, if this thing isn't connected, can you give me an explanation of what might be going on?
That's huge. There's a tightrope walk that we need to be doing on this.
Yeah.
And
it's a hell of a road. It's like a dental floss.
Yeah. It's like, The Walenda's got nothing on this. There's a reference that's kind of obscure. But family of like tightrope walkers and whatnot.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah. Do not look up. Never mind. There's some videos that are harrowing. So yes, I tell other people.
Unpack all that, Geoff. Is what that's
okay. Yeah. All right. So I have a thing against science groupies. That's a term that I think I coined however many years ago. But the science groupie is the person who likes to speak to these kind of like low hanging fruit, little, like the stuff you put on T-shirts. Like. It's usually stuff about like climate change, GMOs, vaccines, etc. Like they have their normal talking points. Not that I disagree with the majority of what a lot of these people, like the end conclusions overall that they would have, but I don't like how they file down, they sand down all of the little bumps and nuances for the sake of like a single sentence that feels like a rallying cry, right? So yeah, science groupies. We can be crass enough on here, right?
I love that term. That's
great. Well,
because the reality is those bumps are people's lives and experiences where they're like, what the hell is happening?
There's still something. It's still a data point. It's still something at the very least, right? And so these are the same people who, coming back to my earlier point about thinking that science is just like a bunch of cool facts. They're like, oh, I love science. Because, I love space. Ooh, pictures of planets or like cool biology pictures or whatever. It's a very visual thing. And it's a very like, oh, I'll watch a science documentary and think like, ooh, I love science. And the response to that is, you don't love science. You stare at its ass as it walks by. Right. And I didn't make that up. Somebody Whittier years ago came up with that. Like
that's
IFLS
totally
was
true.
saying,
it's like you get in bed with it, and it has cellulite and it has hair sticking out. It's like, hang on.
Yeah, you got a few razor bumps here and there or whatever, right? But no, like there's stuff going on. Like there are details here that we shouldn't throw out. And the thing is, and I try to, like, I'm going to shake people. The trend can still be the trend. We're not taking away from that. Like, I'm not taking something from you. You can still acknowledge that there are exceptions or still acknowledge that there are areas of uncertainty. That is being a good scientist. Mm-hmm. Being a proper skeptic is not roundly accepting or roundly denying a thing. It's having an appropriate amount of reserved judgment depending on the weight of the evidence or the weight and the compelling nature of the argument being made, the logic that's applied, all of that. Mm-hmm. And so if you're secure in where you stand and in who you are as a person interfacing with this stuff, you shouldn't feel a need, I think, to take these absolute points of view or these absolute stances of this is always true or this is never true. Yes, there are cases of that, like to the extent that we can be absolute about anything.
Mm-hmm. It just doesn't work. I mean, nothing works that way.
In applied like human physiology and human study stuff, almost never, because there are just too many variables. Like on the extreme end of certainty, we have like gravity, and even that we could talk about Newtonian gravity versus relativistic gravity. We don't have to go into that, but the point is, because there are differences, right? We have that level of certainty. And so everything else is at least somewhat less certain than that. Mm-hmm. And then it's just degrees of uncertainty. And, what we tend to do, I've taught it this way before in talking about observations. And actually this gets back to an earlier objective talking about accuracy or reliability of measurements and that kind of thing.
Right.
I'm bringing it back. Okay.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you.
One person can make an observation. It lands wherever it lands. And that observation, to some extent, whether the person wants to or not, is going to be kind of shaped by that person's vision. They can only see so far in every direction. They can observe what they can observe, and it's from their angle. And then you have another person who's just as honest and just as skilled, but has a different perspective, attempts the same observation. Hopefully, there will be more overlap than not between those two. But they're not going to be, that Venn diagram's not going to be a circle, right? There's going to be some divergence. Do that repeatedly. And wherever you see these observations continuing to overlap over time, that central area tends to be where we are most confident. Okay, there's probably lowercase t truth there, right? Mm-hmm. That's probably the closest to what's true. There's some probability to this. The first person might have been the most accurate. We don't know for certain. There's always a degree of uncertainty. But if we accumulate a bunch of observations and they trend in a certain direction, then that starts to inform our confidence. And unfortunately, though, that brings us back to this issue of like public lack of confidence in science because of that uncertainty. And how do we address that? It's tough. It's top down and it's bottom up, I think. I think the messaging from authorities needs work. Mm-hmm. I think government entities need to change what they're doing. I think that large-scale private entities need to change how they're communicating, though if they have a profit motive not to, then we'll see if they ever change, right? And then from the grassroots, culturally, things need to change. And that's a really hard one. Like, I can try to change how I operate in my little sphere of influence. You can do the same. Mm-hmm. And hopefully we kind of infect people a little bit with a certain level of enthusiasm and care, and then they kind of spread the good word. But there's no single, like a magic bullet for this, because there just isn't. Society loves absolute answers and single cures for things, and we normally don't have that. So it's going to be a long road, probably, to address some of this stuff.
Yeah, and then the political tie-ins. Mm-hmm. We haven't even talked about that. I mean, but that's like a whole other influence into what we believe or what we don't believe. I actually pissed off everybody in my family at one point during the pandemic because we were all like out at a restaurant, and my parents, everybody's kind of on the red team, but like my parents decided to get vaccinated and some other people decided not to get vaccinated. And I was like, told my mom, I was like, wow, I can't believe you got vaccinated. Like, everybody was like, I mean, they were very graceful, but yeah, it was like just this.
How dare you?
Yeah, it was no judgment on them as people. I'm like, I love you, you're my family, whatever, but it was like, kind of abhorrent to them that like I would think that they wouldn't get vaccinated because of that general stance. And then the other people who didn't were like, we have good reason. And I was like, okay, I'm just backing out of this entire.
Back away slowly. Don't touch anything. Don't bump the door frame on the way out. I was thinking about this too, relating to science, relating to the public's understanding of it. It's just like, like anything political, religious, cultural, etc. It's easy to have a fear of a thing you don't understand. It's easy to have a fear and a distrust of some faceless, two-dimensional, flat entity over there.
Yeah.
So what I often tell people, and you may have seen me do this in the comment sections in places before, I'm like, I'll say, do you know any scientists? Do you know anybody who spends time in a lab? Because if you did, you'd recognize how ludicrous most of what you're saying is. Maybe not 100%, but most of this is kind of ridiculous because you're implying something impossible. It's kind of like hardcore conspiracy theory stuff where they're like, tens of thousands of people are engaged in some massive cover-up. It's like, have you ever tried to manage a team of half a dozen people and keep a secret from getting out? It's really hard.
It's impossible.
And it compounds exponentially, it seems, with every person you add. So this comes back to a point I wanted to make earlier. If you want people to have a better understanding of science or a better understanding of research, how these measurements are made, one of the easiest solutions, well, it's not always easy, but it can be for a lot of people if they happen to be adjacent, is meet a scientist. Make friends with some people who do this stuff. Just like, again, like I was saying, just like if you want to understand members of a different religion or members of a different culture, well, you can read about them in books, or you can get your little, Instagram reels from some influencer telling you whatever they're trying to tell you because they got to sell you something. Or you can just go and meet them and see, and then ask them what their life is like. Is it controlled scientific research? No. You're just having your own anecdotal experience of going and meeting a person, but it is powerful stuff and it humanizes them, which is really important. We have so many problems, and this kind of becomes a meta commentary on even global politics and cultural strife and all of that. But we have so many problems that come from just not humanizing people. And for some reason, scientists have been a class of people that have been okay to dehumanize. I'm not trying to say they're an oppressed group or anything, but in the context of this overarching conversation we're having, it's pretty telling. I found it pretty telling for a long time that people, like, without thinking about it, was just like, oh, those scientists. I'm like, you realize I'm one, right? Like you're talking to one. Well, you're different. What's that sound like?
Yeah, I know.
Well, you're from this side of the tracks, so it's different. So I think, a lot of those personal biases come in and we don't even realize they're there. Well, I mean, that's the thing about bias. It's often something that we're blind to. It's insidious in that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's not necessarily, I mean, this has been my experience in talking to people and trying to kind of suss out, like, really, like, what is beneficial and what is not. Like, I would almost say it that way versus true or not.
That is a better thing, yes. What is likely to be beneficial?
There's so many little parts of it where it's like, I often think back to the nirvana fallacy where people want solutions that are perfect, that cause no harm. Me too. I think we all
would love that.
I have to get a mammogram on Friday. I'm not looking forward to it. I know that there is some risk, but do I think the benefit likely outweighs the risk? Yeah, I totally do. So I'm going to go do that. But like, that's one part of it. And then I think it seems like it's more that there is a mistrust, and I have a bias around this, a mistrust of the like industry context that surrounds science, or even like the government or political context that surrounds science versus the science. And to me, what that boils down to is it's just people. Like human beings are not going to create this clean cut product. So it's very hard, one, to accept that, and then two, to apply that to like reading a research paper. By the way, they're so shit. You know what I mean?
It is exceedingly rare to find an interesting one that's just interesting on its own merits. It's presented
in this way that's unappealing. You know, okay, so it's like, I got it. It's understandable. You've got 3 kids, a full-time job. You're going to try and make it to the gym. You know, it's like, who's going to sit down and read a research paper? But it's like, you put all of that together, and then you scroll on social media and you see, you know, this guy putting methylene blue eye drops in or whatever. And he's like, I feel better. That's real, Geoff. I feel better than I've
I know. I've seen.
And you're like, well, you know, or you listen to a podcast and somebody has, you know, this doctor on that's talking, you know, all this, like all their skepticism around it. And you're like, well, they're a doctor. It's like, it's a very easy, it's very easy to memify all of this.
It's exceedingly easy. And
it's complicated.
And human beings don't naturally gravitate towards a good understanding of statistics. And I don't mean like stats terms. I don't mean necessarily, you know, whether you're talking about, you know, null hypothesis significance testing, so p-values and whatnot, or anything, but just basic ratios, like the basic idea of likelihood and risk. These are hard things, even though technically we cover it in like primary and secondary school. Somehow, by the time people reach adulthood, that is like just slipped out of the brain completely, and it doesn't seem relatable to our everyday lives. And so then you encounter something that absolutely is relatable, you just don't know it. You know, and whether it's, well, okay, there is some percentage of risk in a certain number of people to have an adverse reaction to a vaccine. Like, that's a real thing. We got to know about that. You have to make informed decisions about, if I take in too much of this macronutrient, I might have problem X because of, you know, whatever. And that, we're not comfortable with, one, just there not being absolute certainty either way. And then if there isn't, where within that kind of gray area in the middle do we land? Oh, you mean I got to think about math? And culturally in the US anyway, that's a huge, huge problem.
Or just not having the bandwidth. I mean, to me, that's what I see. It's
that's
like,
huge too.
Yeah. How do you call like two people that are married with no kids? There's like a term for it, like a dual. There's like
is it dual income, no kids? Dinks.
Yeah, that's what we are. You know, Andrew and I like don't have kids. You know, we're financially, you know, we're fine. But it's like in the day to day, by the time I'm done with my day, I'm like,
tiring.
I'm exhausted. I cannot even imagine what it is like for people who are just making it. They've got a couple kids or one kid. It's like, what are they going to do? Sit down and like parse out the pros and cons of, you know, it's like they've got to kind of make a decision. And if there's, this is the part that sucks. People who are questioning are like, awesome. You should question, you know, it's like you absolutely need to question what's happening in your life and like make informed decisions. The problem is that gets co-opted, and it's like it gets taken advantage of, so that they're not actually led to like look at nuance and like calmly consider. They get hyped up, and then all of a sudden they have like 40 supplements on their counter, and they're enrolled in a course that, you know, is being led by whatever Jamoke, you know, decided to create a nutrition course. That's the hard part, is like that natural tendency that people have that is needed and beneficial. We have taken advantage of.
We have so many bad actors out there who, you know, it's the American dream, right? Profit at any cost. You have people who will see you as a mark oh, you have doubts, you have worries. Well, come this way. I got something for you.
Yeah.
And so that is a big part of it. And then to that question, that idea of like, oh, people are asking questions. Great. In many cases, there are answers to those questions, but they're buried in the noise too. Yeah. The signal to noise ratio, especially on social media, is so god awful that, you know, for every one person who has, you know, 200 followers who actually is brilliant, but like is too busy doing work in the lab or too busy actually being an expert to build their brand. I hate that phrasing sometimes. I'm like, ugh, I feel kind of gross. People are like, Geoff, you got to build your brand. I'm like, what does that even mean, really? It's like, you got to produce content. What the hell is content?
Geoff, I'll sell you, a brand consulting package.
We'll work something out after this call. We'll stay on the call. But yeah, so you have so much of this noise out there, though. And, you know, who are you going to listen to? The person who's got hundreds of thousands of followers or maybe even millions and has all of this external kind of glitzy validation, you know, this halo effect around them too, because maybe they're good at one thing, so you assume everything's amazing. I'm going to name names. All right, I'm going to drop a name. So you got like the Huberman effect, right?
Oh, I know. Jeff loves Andrew Huberman.
Screenshot that look I just made. But it's an example. Like
best friend.
It's an example of somebody who like had an area of expertise, like, hey, ocular neuroscience, biochemistry stuff. It's a very niche area. I think that's what it was. He was great at, and then just get on a podcast. And actually, I called it the podcast effect too. I don't know if other people have used these terms, right? But it's like I say as I'm on a podcast. But like you get invited on that, you get a little more notoriety. So then you get invited on another one that's related, but not quite the same thing. So you start stretching a bit. You start tiptoeing past the boundary into another area you're not as much of an expert in. But it's close enough that you can still kind of generally navigate it, but then you go farther and farther. And then before you know it, you started off as a neuroscientist, and now you're talking about, you know, like hormones, and you're talking about exercise physiology. I've watched that man butcher stuff relating to muscle physiology, for example. It gives me hives. And, you know, so you have this situation that occurs. So you also have a lot of that. And then people will, and this is important, people will use this as a rebuttal because, oh, no, look how brilliant this person is. Yeah. And they're a Harvard educated whatever, or a Stanford educated. They love name dropping, they love whatever. This cycles back, actually, yay for callbacks. This brings me back to a point that came up earlier about not being able to, or not being encouraged to follow the evidence and stay neutral or stay kind of detached and more objective, but instead following people. And this has been a criticism I have, having worked, you know, in kind of this functional health world with my work with, you know, UWS or, and again, the reason I even know you two, right? One of the criticisms I've had of that world is that more than the quote unquote conventional medicine world, there seems to be a tendency towards hero worship and a tendency towards, give me a personality to follow. Whose protocol do I get to follow? Yes. Or whose words do I hang on for dear life? And, you know, I encourage people to divorce themselves from that. Like, you got to step back from that because you're losing so much objectivity.
What's bad about that is, like, you know, the science junkies are about just follow the science. It's like, well, we're just like follow Joe Rogan or whoever.
It's like, you know, it's yes. And if you really want to be good about the evidence, or you really want to be as objective as possible, stop having hero figures. Like, just stop. There's a phrase, kill your heroes, right? And of course it's not literal, but it's also a song by AWOL Nation. But there's this welcome to my brain. There's just this idea that I need a person, I need a figurehead to lionize, instead of saying, well, no, I like you. Like, people like me, a few, surprisingly. But I keep telling the handful, like the 12 followers I have, I'm like, don't call yourself a follower of me. I'm not leading a cult here. I can be wrong. Question me. If you like what I'm saying, have it be because you actually like what I'm saying, and not because you like me. Keep those as two completely separate things. Like, the fact that you're my friend should not mean you automatically will believe everything I say. Now, hopefully if you like me, it's because I keep saying and doing things that are consistent with what is likely to be true, or what is more accurate, what's more ethical, what's more whatever. But, you know, you got to get the direction on that correct, you know? Yeah. And I think there's a tendency for that. And I was picking on functional medicine. It's across the board. Like we said, you know, get the science groupies who do their version of it, whether they're following somebody like, you know, Neil deGrasse Tyson, who more and more over the years became like a tweeter, right? Like I'm just going to release, everything is reduced to like some really short form communication that removes all the nuance. Like, dude, you used to be on like astronomy documentaries and stuff. That was cool. And now, it's like, okay, you're just releasing another tweet, whatever. So yeah, don't be a follower of people at the expense of just trying to see what the information honestly says, and recognize that everybody's fallible, and just those couple of things can take people a really long way.
I love that. That was really like hitting the nail on the head. And I think, like you had said before, in the US, we, for some reason, are really apt to just have to have that. We have to know the answer. There can't be any questions. And we also do the thing where we hero worship, and it's everybody. It's celebrities, it's influencers, it's
huge
functional medicine doctors.
It's science.
Science. It's politicians. It's whatever. And it's like, it's very bizarre. I don't understand it. And I think it's something in our culture that we're encouraged to do from a young age. I mean, I remember in elementary school, other kids being like, well, who's your, have a magazine. Who's your favorite? Who do you like? Who do you want to dress like? And even as a kid, I was like, this is so weird. Like, who are these people? Like, why do I care about them? But it continues. It goes with, media and consuming reality TV, consuming movies, looking to these people and worshiping them. And that ties over to wellness.
We want these paragons, right? We need a paragon. We need an ideal. It's almost like was it a Platonic ideal? Is that the one I'm thinking of? That we point to, like there's this thing that is beyond us normal mortals that we can worship, or that we can follow, that we can kind of invest and project onto,
right.
In American culture, especially. I apologize, Victoria, if I interrupted you, if you were about to say something.
No,
okay.
I'm just thinking, Hannah and I have been doing research. We've been doing research. We've been preparing for an episode on this Netflix documentary. It's not a documentary. It's like a series. It's like a series, like a
it's a dramatized. Yeah, it's not a documentary. I started to watch it, Apple Cider Vinegar.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, this isn't a documentary. It's a dramatization, but it closely follows this woman in Australia, I believe. And there's a couple 60-minute investigations into her, who I totally missed her when she was Insta famous. Because I didn't have Instagram back then, but like it was in 2012, 2013, I think.
Yeah.
And she built this empire and made a lot of money off of telling people that she had cancer, brain cancer, and some other cancers, and that she had, thrown out conventional medicine because it wasn't working, and healed herself with juicing and Whole Foods, and built an app for her Whole Foods, and she never had cancer. And so but people trusted her. She had hundreds of thousands of followers, and people looked to her and had no idea. I don't know if she was truly conning them. I think she may be unwell, and just was.
That's always a possibility.
Super complex, but also she was in fact conning them,
Yeah, whether intentionally or not. Like there was a clear an exploitation based in a belief in something that was not true. Or and it's rough. But we fall for these things because we look for these hero figures, and also we look for teams to be on. You gotta pick a side. Pick a side.
And so much of it, I think, like it goes back, Hannah, our conversation in the beginning of like kind of why do people interact with information the way they do, and why do they act the way they do? I tend to just always think back to like, well, what formed us? Like how did we become human? How did we evolve? But that's my bias. It's like what I want to study. If I ever get it together to get a PhD, it's like there are a lot of it, like genetic influences on the way that we act, I think, that are showing up now. But I always come back to, it's like we have an ability inborn also, like in our structure, we have a prefrontal cortex. We have a way to look past those tendencies into a more balanced way of living that would be I can't handle, like it would be so much more beneficial for us. That woman, Belle Gibson, she's like an extreme example.
Sure.
It's like, I don't think Andrew Huberman is like intentionally, or I don't think he has like he's not like a psychopath. She has like, it really seems like she has something going on, but it's like there are degrees that come to like do your best to try and step outside of all this information that you're being exposed to see, like, is there any critical thinking that you can have around this versus just saying like the science is marred because of funding, or, you know, like,
we have a choice about that.
Yeah, surely humans have the ability to do that versus just having these split-second decisions to be on a team, you know, to be part of the tribe, to like view things in a heuristic because it takes less calories. It's like those things are real, but y'all, come on.
Yeah, so many things, and we don't have to go into the political direction with this, but there are so many things that seem to be informed by making decisions from a place of fear or insecurity. Kind of comes back to my point earlier, right? When I said, if you feel secure in how you're approaching this stuff, you should not feel a need to take these absolute points of view. You should be able to couch things carefully and kind of teeter right on that spot. And I've had people who are like, hey, if you're one of us, which is a red flag, whether they know or not, right? But like, again, on the sciencey side, that's a weird thing to even say. When I say that, I mean the science groupie side. I'm careful with wielding the term scientism because that's a cudgel used by a lot of quacks out there also to discredit things. So it's a weird back and forth, right? Pendulum swing. But they'll say, don't you believe this such is true? I'm like, most of the time, yes, with this caveat. And they're like, oh, come on. Like, they think I'm being disingenuous. I'm like, no, you're the one being disingenuous. It costs you nothing to acknowledge that little kernel of you know, that disagrees or that conflicts with the overall trend or the whatever the narrative is. And I want to be honest, and especially as a teacher, right? I got to be careful what I'm modeling for my students. I want them to be careful consumers of this stuff and careful communicators about all of these things. Whether they're going to be scientists or not, they at least have to be able to navigate a world that moment to moment is always influenced by these things. And, you know, I'm not doing my job if I'm not modeling that. So it's a weird space to be in, for sure.
Yeah, this is the thing. It not only doesn't cost them, it actually helps. It's the point I will always come back to. It's like,
it's freeing.
The more nuanced and accurate that you can get, and it might even just be personal, the way that like whatever you're experiencing is being applied to you, the better your life is going to be. You know, it's like, I mean, for me at least, it's like my experience, the reason that I feel like I have this like need to question more and more is because I did the whiplash from conventional to functional medicine and found just as many kooks over there, except I was paying cash. You know?
That's kind of the thing. It's like, is it covered by insurance or not?
There's part of it, you know, where people pay thousands. I mean, Geoff, I joke, but this is like, you know, at this point, my God, an $80,000 face, because I was like, nobody can get me answers. I'm going to turn to allergy testing and herbs and supplements with food, away from food. So, eating different dietary protocols and like everything, leeches, you know, it's like, and then, you know, it's like, okay, well, do you know what actually works the best is a 1% ivermectin solution and like an unscented lotion that you get from a compounding pharmacy. It's like, but do I also take care of the underlying reasons why I might have rosacea thanks to what I've learned from research-based medicine? Yeah, but and that's the part that's so hard. It's like that was from 2011 until today. Like how many, you know, 14 years of trying to figure that out. Yeah, it's like, so no wonder somebody's like, I'm just going to order this greens powder even though it costs $70 a quart or whatever.
We're mentally exhausted, and that comes back to the issue of like signal to noise ratio. We are just bombarded with, and it's not just social media, though that does seem to be the way most people seem to get their news and the majority of their information overall.
Huge.
It's huge with a capital Y. And it's just, I don't know why I started
saying We're in the Northeast.
Yeah. But, right? Even though I'm not from the Northeast. I don't know if people are picking up on
We're all from the South.
Yeah.
All three of us.
Yeah. It's really, really funny. But, you know, I joke about my thick Cajun accent.
Oh my God, yeah, Geoff is from Louisiana.
Oh,
I am South Central Louisiana. I am literally a Cajun.
I think, Geoff, it would be really cool if you're open to it. I mean, we've had like a good blanket conversation, but to have you back on in the future to like go into like the specific objections, like we talked about funding a little bit, you know,
bullet that out for sure.
The main one, but yeah, to like really get specific, because I think there's so much good there is a discussion around where information comes from. We have to be able to navigate this a little bit for our own good.
Yes.
So if we can help people do that.
For sure. There's, where are you getting your information from externally? And then I think another either parallel conversation or one that comes either right before or right after should be where we are deriving our own kind of internal information, or where are we doing our own observations in our lives. Coming back to like what you were talking about, Victoria, you had to tried all these different things to see what helped with your skin. And if you're an N of one, you can say, I think this is what worked, but it's like there wasn't a parallel universe version of you that didn't do the thing.
Right.
In a controlled experiment kind of format, so you had both cases of that independent variable. Like it's tough, right?
Like it's totally will be devoted to Tim Sharp for the rest of my life. Hannah, do you have time right now? Are you okay?
I'm okay right now until I hear a pitter patter of feet running in here to get me.
I posted on Facebook years ago, I had taken some antibiotic to get rid of blastocystis hominis because I thought that's what was causing this, at that time, undiagnosed rash. And I was so stoked, and I was like, okay, I'm going to put it out there. Maybe it'll help somebody else. And Dr. Sharp was like, hey, he asked, are you open to hearing what I think might be going on? Or like, there could be this other thing. And I was like, yeah, I have been trying to solve this forever. So if you have an explanation, please tell me. And he was like, I don't think that B. hominis is what's leading to this. Like, here's some information about that. And here's why an antibiotic might have worked. If I hadn't been open to that, I would have just been like, that connection would have stayed in my mind, but that wasn't actually the mechanism of what was happening. And I think people do that they're like, well, and it's like, great. Are you sure that it worked the way that you thought it did? And like you're saying, there's a reason we have controlled experiments.
And was it controlled? Did the thing do what you think it did? And then a corollary to that is, did it do what it did in the way that you think it did? Yes. I've jumped on people, especially in anything clinical, where they're like, oh, I healed my such and such to do X and Y. Well, whoa, okay, slow down. Outwardly, you notice an improvement. That's fantastic.
It's
so
great.
In some way, something worked. That doesn't mean you have to automatically attach a mechanism you cannot possibly have identified. Right. And I say this to fellow physiologists too. There are people in my own field with people who've had a doctorate since I was in diapers who still make this mistake in my own field. And of course, like, they're not going to listen to me if I say anything, but I'll still say it because I'm loud and annoying. But it's my job. And my advisor, Dr. Headley, will he'll just be like, oh God. He puts up with me. He's going to celebrate. He'll be dancing.
He probably loves it.
He tolerates me. He'll be celebrating when I'm finally finished and he's free of me, I bet. but the point is, like, they lose sight of that. And so even at the expert level, we're human and we have these biases, and sometimes they become like subculture biases that, it's like we're in our own little encapsulated shell. And it's like a little bit of an echo chamber, and nobody challenges the thing. And so, you're all experts in your field. You know a lot about your field, but then there's nobody saying, hey, guys, like in the back of the room, just raising a hand. Did anybody see this, massive, fuchsia colored pachyderm in the middle of the room that we should all address? So it's that kind of thing that I just...
But I think even before that is like what this episode addresses is like, you have to kind of believe that there is some validity to the research that you're reading before you can even start to like draw those conclusions. And
Absolutely.
I think some people get stuck there, and then it's like, well, where do you go from there? It's like, there's only so many places to get information from. And if that's not one of them, then in my opinion, it's like you're drawing on personal experiences. There's not many places else to go. So that vacuum, unfortunately, has led to, it led to our podcast. So that's...
Right. There's a vacuum. What's going to fill it? And you can fill it with something, hopefully, that's thoughtful and that maybe in a clumsy fashion steers you in the right direction. Or it can be something that's just coming from knee-jerk reactions and prejudices we bring to the table, or just random assumptions sometimes, like, well, I got nothing else, I'm just going to assume it's this until proven otherwise. But if you don't have a standard for what would be proving it, then you kind of cling to that forever, and it never changes. And this is how I think a lot of people reach like late stages in life still believing some ridiculous things. And it's easy to point a finger and say, oh, you're stupid. And maybe some of them are. But
there's actually Julia Galef
a lot of
wrote that book, The Scout Mindset,
mm-hmm.
and does a brilliant job of laying out, like, there are people with incredible IQs, lots
Watch
of
some videos of hers.
She's so rad in how she lays this out. And it's like, having bias and believing a certain thing is not based on, your intelligence. Largely, it seems fueled by emotion, tribalism.
Dangerously, it seems also really intelligent people sometimes are really good at rationalizing a belief and even crystallizing it more. And, they know how to defend it in ways that
happens
some people can't.
I saw this factoid, which I don't know how accurate it is because I saw it's like a meme or a screenshot of an article on.
No need to vet it. It's good. Just go with it.
About cognitive function throughout life and how, like, having a more flexible way of thinking and being open to question and open to new information is associated with better cognitive aging, like having a brain that's healthier longer into your life. And if you are more rigid in your thoughts and defensive and resistant to new information, maybe that could be a sign of cognitive decline, like an early sign of that. I don't know if that's true, but I thought it was interesting I want to look into it.
I think I've seen information that corroborates that.
Yeah.
Whether it's causal or result, that's always going to be hard to parse out, especially with like cognitive stuff. It's not my area, but I know just enough about the brain as a former neuromuscular-ish physiologist to get myself in trouble. I can talk a little bit about it. But...
Jeff, if there is like an aspect of this conversation that you think would be valuable to dive into more, and we can talk, outside of this recording, obviously we'll be listening and thinking also, and reading comments on Facebook, I'm sure. I would love to have you back on to go deeper into specifics.
Yeah, it'd be great. I'd love to keep doing it. I mean, we only have, 3 or 4 dozen things that we could probably unpack from this. So, we'll create a shared Google Doc or something and just start bulleting it all out. But there's a lot we could do. I'll share
it with you when we get. I haven't even looked at it during our conversation, but
I'm not shocked.
Some notes before.
Happy to do it.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It's really fun to talk about this.
Like the most important meta conversation I think that we can have, and we'll get back to lying influencers and the lies they tell.
The lying liars and the lies that they lie. Yeah.
Well, not all. I mean, it's so hard because it isn't all of them, but
and is it a lie if they think they're telling the truth and they just make an honest mistake?
That's the crazy. This woman that we're looking into. Do yourself a favor, or God, not, and watch this interview of her on 60 Minutes. It's from like 6 years ago, I want to say.
Yeah.
6 years ago, yeah.
She was this Australian influencer. Yeah, and in this interview, it is wild. She's like, I believed that I had a brain tumor. I mean, the interviewer's like not buying it at all. I think
the interviewer is just a hard ass. She was just like, you could just see it on her face. She's trying not to just laugh at this woman. She's like trying to decompose because she's like, really? Just
like pushing it down.
You're lying. You just changed your story again. Like she's
Well, the more I see, the more I'm convinced that the human brain, while being an absolutely fascinating, brilliant, immensely complex piece of biological machinery, is also just one of the weirdest, squishiest, most confusing, stupid, silly things in the world because of what it can lead us to do. It's 3 pounds of jelly in your skull, like, of course it's going to make a mistake from time to time.
Oh my God, this is a mistake, a capital M mistake. But the bottom line too is like being wrong doesn't feel good. It feels bad.
No.
So don't like to be wrong.
That can be a thing we can dive into more because I have my own personal experience with this. And of course it relates a lot to like political changes I went through and the environment I grew up in, but other things too. An interesting intersection between the internal, I'm going to call it internal and versus external ego. And there's not time to unpack it right now, but if you want to, and it's just like my N of one. It's how I approach certain things, but maybe it can lead to some fun stuff. But yeah, how are you going to question things? How badly do you want it? Like, if you really want to be right, not sound right or feel right, do you want to be right? How badly do you want it? Because it's going to sting.
It's going to suck.
So are you willing to crawl through that? Like, go through the suck do the hard thing, right? Or do the thing that you're scared of if it matters enough to you to do it. And involves questioning maybe very
everybody
deeply
should
held
have
beliefs.
something that makes their skin on their face just look like total hell. And I'll tell you what, that is an enormous motivator to be completely okay with being wrong. You're like,
Hey,
I was
man.
wrong about that, but it'll help my skin. No problem. Maybe I'm just so vain. The vanity beat the ego into submission.
That's another thing that I think is a problem that we're dealing with societally too, is people like, oh, why don't they develop these critical thinking skills more? Why don't they face the wrong? They don't know what the payoff is. I think a lot of times people just aren't convinced that it's good for them.
Skin. That's the payoff.
Right? Like I can tell people this has freed me of so many issues, but I gotta sell them on it. I gotta make that compelling and convincing to them, and that's a challenge sometimes. It's a challenge with my students all the time.
People don't care about stuff unless it affects them personally. I mean, you see that with everything. You see that with, human rights issues, with politics, with,
Empathy is a really hard thing to compel people into.
Yeah.
It's really hard, if not impossible. So yeah, I'm with you on that for sure.
Yeah, maybe Geoff, the next time we'll talk about the power of being wrong.
That could be. That's a great episode title.
Yes, let's do it.
I'm down with that, and we could have a lot of fun with it for sure.
Thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciate it.
I really appreciate it too.
Geoff, we'll see you soon.
Wicked.